and welcome our second speaker. And while Leslie's speaking, I'm going to try to log in and log out because everyone's still frozen for me, but I'm glad you can still hear me. And then hopefully it'll be resolved, even if I have to restart my internet. But let me go ahead and introduce Leslie Luqueno, who I actually met this summer when I was at the Latino Studies Association convening in July. And the theme was just beautiful. It was called Centering Blackness and Challenging Latinidad. And I would add with an asterisk, with love, right? Because it is about creating this implicit solidarity among Latinos who are different by race, by gender, by class, by national origin, by immigration status, etc. That is who we are as Latinos, right? That we are different, but we're in solidarity with each other. And Leslie was one of the presenters on a panel with AJ Alvero, who presented to us last time his work on the importance of understanding who are the Latino students, and in this case, he was looking at the University of California, that were gaining access to the most elite schools in California, and found, surprise, many of them were high income, and also happened to be of European background, of backgrounds that were, in general, not necessarily reflective of the majority of the students are in California. So that is just shining a light on what needs to be talked about when we say, how are we even qualifying for HSI status? And there's an associated paper. But I'll switch gears here now. And it is my privilege and honor to introduce Leslie Patricia Luqueno, who's a PhD candidate at Stanford. And she will be discussing her forthcoming chapter, Framing the Future, exploring how the children of Latinx immigrants connect past, present, and future during the college decision-making process. Leslie Luqueno hails from Los Angeles, California, and holds a BA in Anthropology and Educational Studies from Haverford College and an MA in Sociology from Stanford. Currently, her research focuses on how the children of immigrants and their families navigate the college application process, with a special emphasis on the unique skills and knowledges students develop that help them survive and thrive in a college institution. She utilizes qualitative data science and community-based research methods. She explores how Latinx students navigate the college application process and current threats to affirmative action nationwide. And drawing on her research and experience as a first-generation to college student from a working-class Mexican family, Luqueno's presentation invites us to think about how we can tap in to our Latinx families' assets and deconstruct the individualistic higher education system many students feel constrained in. So without further ado, we want to welcome Leslie Luqueno. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction, Dr. Lopez, and for the invitation again. And I'm really excited to be sharing the space with y'all and sharing a little bit more about my research and hopefully how it is applicable to your institutions if it is. I do not have screen sharing privilege, so I might need that.
I don't know if, Lorena, are you able to do that?
Yes, give me one.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Until I log back in, I don't think I can because everything's frozen for some strange reason, but we will try.
No worries.
Give me a second. Okay, you should be able to do it now.
Great, thank you. Okay, great. So like Dr. Lopez mentioned, I will be presenting on my forthcoming book chapter, and I'll talk a little bit more about when it's coming out and all that at the end. But it's titled Framing the Future, Exploring How Children of Latinx Immigrants Connect Past, Present, and Future During the Decision-Making Process. And my name is Leslie, but I'll give a little bit of a more thorough introduction in a bit. But before I do that, I kind of just want to let people introduce themselves in the room. And I'm going to have a prompt for you. So just kind of like looking back to when you were ready to pursue higher education, whenever that was, and kind of putting yourself in the shoes of like who you were at that time, what were some of the motivations or reasons for wanting to attend a college institution? And you can just put them in the chat. Yeah, just to read some of the ones that are popping in, and please feel free to like populate the chat more. I was more scared to then motivate, for the motivation was my mother, economic improvement, finding a job in a career that I wanted to work in, fulfilling my dream and making my parents proud of their crianza. Get a degree, make money, expectations of others, and self-motivation. Yeah, so please feel free to continue populating that as you will. But like, as you can see, people pursue college education for different reasons. And somebody just mentioned it was expected of me as the oldest child, and that I will get into because that was my experience as well. But as you can see, like, people are pursuing college for a lot of different reasons, and a lot of them are not just like academic reasons of like wanting to pursue a certain major or whatnot, but also wanting to financially improve, or like motivation from family, etc. So yeah, and that's kind of what my study looks at as well. And I'm really interested in exploring how the children of Latinx immigrants kind of juggle these multiple reasons for pursuing a college education. And as I'll discuss in my findings, these students seldom have just one reason for wanting to pursue college, and they have to kind of balance out these different reasons for wanting to pursue a higher education at the point of like deciding whether and where to pursue higher education. And kind of like the overarching theme of my presentation and of kind of the paper is that college is more than just an academic institution. So really thinking about, like, students are not just pursuing an education for the sake of like studying a certain thing, although that might be a driving factor. But especially for children of Latinx immigrants, I find that like family, socioeconomic status, the desire for upward mobility, these all are convening together as students are crafting their aspirations as they pursue higher education during the application process. And just to give you a little bit of context about what I'll be talking about today, I'll give a short introduction to myself and kind of how I came to this research, as well as to introduce you to one of my participants, Alice, who I hope will contextualize the paper and just give you a little bit more insight into what the chapter hopes to accomplish. Second, I'll go over my methods, and I'll talk to you about my year-long qualitative study that I conducted with 14 Latinx students from Southeast Los Angeles. Third, I'll go over my conceptual framework, just talk a little bit more about like the theories that I use and how they might be applied to like practical settings, and why these kinds of theories are important to think about as we think about supporting students who have a lot of multiple reasons for wanting to pursue higher education. And then I'll end with results and discussion, and really just talk about the implications of this work and kind of set us up to talk about like why conceiving a student's possible selves and who they hope to become in the future might help us in our practice. So yeah, just to give a quick introduction to myself, because I think it's important not just to ramble on about like research, but also kind of like what grounds me and why I do this work. So I'm currently a PhD candidate at Stanford in my third year, but I'm originally from Bell Gardens, California, in Southeast Los Angeles. It's a predominantly Latinx and working class community. I grew up there my whole life, going to the public schools there. And I didn't leave until I like got accepted to go to Haverford College in suburban Pennsylvania on a full ride scholarship. So I opted to like move across the country to be able to pursue that financial aid, but attend a predominantly white institution. And being at Stanford, that's something that I continue being a part of. So I want to acknowledge that like I hope to talk to implications for like HSIs and whatnot, but at the same time acknowledging that like I have not myself been at an HSI, and that of course limits some of my insights, but also having experience predominantly white institutions as a Latina first generation student plays a big role in my research as well. And just a bit of background, like Dr. Lopez mentioned, I'm the first in my family to pursue a college education. And I know somebody in the chat had mentioned that they kind of went to college because they were like kind of the expectation of the eldest child, which was very much my experience as well, coming from a working class Mexican immigrant family. And they're pictured there, like my parents gave everything for me and my brother to be able to pursue higher education. And when I think back to like 17-year-old me who was prepping to apply to college, it really was rooted in like wanting my family to have a better future and just kind of pay back for everything that they've done for me. So that very much roots my interest in exploring the different reasons that students are pursuing higher education that extend beyond the academic. And I've been working with Campana High School, which is my focal site. It's a pseudonym. I've been working with them for 5 years on college access initiatives. So workshops, just talking to students, etc., before I actually embarked in kind of doing this year-long project. So I've been connected there for a couple of years now since having graduated. So yeah. And I also work as a college admissions consultant and an application reader. So that also grounds a little bit of like my understanding of like why it's important to honor these like different knowledge sets and experiences that students have, because I see on the other end how college admissions, especially predominantly white and elite institutions, do not privilege those knowledge sets during the college application process. So really thinking about what can we do as practitioners to also allow for these knowledges to exist and thrive in our college institutions. And now I'm going to introduce a little bit of one of my participants, Alice, who was one of the focal participants for this paper, especially because she had a very thorough understanding of like why she wanted to go to college. It was rooted in academics, like she really wants to be a nurse. Her ideal college was Cal State LA, which has a nursing program, and she actually got admitted. And that's one of the main reasons like she was considering Cal State LA was because her family was nearby. She was able to pursue a degree that was like upwardly mobile and then something she's passionate about. So I was kind of surprised when Alice told me during our second interview that she actually decided to not attend Cal State LA and she opted to go to a community college instead. And I was like, you know, like that's something that like can lead you to a four-year university, and it's something that like seemed like a really good option for her as well. But I was still kind of surprised, and I asked her like what led her to choose a community college over Cal State LA, and she told me that it was a parental contribution that her parents were expected to make financially that kind of made her opt for the free 2-year college, community college tuition that she was being offered. And when I asked her kind of naively, like why, or like how conversations about her finances had gone with her family, she tells me that she never actually told her parents about how much they had to pay and actually made that decision herself to not put her parents through the burden of paying for college at any, even if it was considered minimal by the college counselor. And she tells me why. I feel like I didn't want to stress them out, and it did. Like it was their dream for me to go there, and I wanted their dreams to come true. But at some point, it was like, I need to know how it's going to affect them. And I didn't want to tell them the actual numbers because I feel like my dad is stressed out with work, as simple as it is. And we had given him more stresses, so I was like, no, I don't want to give them more burden because of my college decision. So we see that even though Alice like got kind of like the ideal situation presented in her hands, she wasn't only contemplating her future for herself, but she was really contemplating how her college decision at this moment would affect her family's well-being, their financial well-being, their emotional well-being, and just like not wanting to add stress to the family. And the counselor was like going back and forth with Alice, and she had a lot of like teachers trying to encourage her to go to Cal State LA. But at the same time, like Alice was very determined that like this was going to be the best path for her and her family. So we see how she kind of collectively comes to this and kind of grounds us in thinking how students are contemplating multiple decisions in terms of familial futures, economic futures, etc., as they're making decisions about whether and where to pursue higher education. So this kind of leads me to my 2 research questions in this paper, which is 1, how do students conceptualize their futures in relation to their past and present? And second, how do possible selves, which I'll describe more in a bit, but kind of means like who students imagine to be in the future. And kind of these conceived futures affect college decision-making. So how students choose majors, location, where to attend, etc. And to tell you a little bit more about the study before I go into the findings, I did a year-long study with 14 Latinx students, and I did in-depth interviews. So one before they decided to apply to college. So like as they were applying, they were talking to me. And then one after their final decision was made on where to attend. I also conducted participant observation and just like really immersed myself in Campana High School to understand like what messages students were getting about college and how students were interacting with the school setting itself. And then I also read through some of their personal statements for the students who are applying to colleges that required personal statements. So this kind of leads to my work with Dr. Alberto as well, and I can answer more questions about that as well in the Q&A. And then in terms of like who participated, I just like asked that students were applying to at least one post-secondary institution for the 2022-2023 school year, including community colleges and vocational schools, have at least one Latin American parent, and kind of non-surprisingly, both all students had both parents who were of Latinx origin and mostly from Mexican and Central American backgrounds. And then lastly, they had to be a student at Campana High School, which is my focal site. And this is a very like outwardly, it appears homogeneous, even though I kind of argue that it's not in a lot of ways. because it is labeled as like 99% Latinx. It's a Title I school, so it's mostly serving low-income families, which is very representative of the community in Southeast Los Angeles that these students are in. And kind of in the spirit of intersectionality, there's a lot of other identities that compound with the identities of like immigrant origin and Latinx identity as well. So all of the students were first gen and low income, 4 were LGBTQ+, 10 were female, 3 were male, and 1 was non-binary. And then at the end, they all decided to attend public colleges and universities in California. And actually, all of them, I figured that out a couple minutes ago, are attending HSI. So they're very much the population that we're interested in. And I hope that their words can speak to some of the experiences that Latinx students may be experiencing at your schools as well. And then total participants were 14. And just to give you a little bit of background into like the research series that I use, I started off with possible selves theory, which sounds more complicated than it is. It really just means like the representation of individuals' ideas of who they want to become, who they might become, and who they are afraid of becoming, and kind of provides a link between like mindset and like motivation. So here we're thinking about like who students want to be in the future and how their different conceptions of who they want to be will affect some of their decision-making processes. And there's like 3 types of possible self described in the literature. In this presentation, we're interested in like the hoped for self, or who students hope to become, and the feared self. And I argue that for children of Latinx immigrants, they're very futuristic oriented. I find that they're really excited for what their futures mean, especially for what higher education can mean for them and their families. So they kind of start off being very like optimistic, and that's something that I think we should really pay attention to. But at the same time, there's also kind of a fear of like the continuation of the current state, which does mean like living in poverty, maybe not having as many educational opportunities as they would like. And those kind of go hand in hand as students are conceptualizing like the decisions they make about higher education. I marry this with kind of the college decision-making and choice work, which really is just looking at the process by which students decide whether and where to pursue higher education. And then lastly, I kind of introduced this idea of immigrant legacies, or also known as immigrant familial histories, and this idea that immigration is an ongoing process and that familial histories of immigration can be passed down intergenerationally through the distribution of knowledge, values, and lessons. And I know prior we were talking about dicho, so that's like a very like formalized way of like passing down knowledge sets from immigrant parents to their children. And I argue that these legacies are resources that immigrant descendants could draw upon as they make sense of themselves, their experiences, and their worlds. And I kind of argue that during the college application process, when students have to make very difficult decisions that will impact their short-term and long-term futures, that these immigrant familial histories are really informing what they're aspiring to become and like what they are not willing to do as well, as we saw in Alice's case. So I kind of delineate like 3 types of possible selves in my paper. First, I kind of think about the college possible self, which is probably the most immediate. Like this really concerns decisions about who the student wants to be in college. So this kind of like can compound into like what majors the student wants to pursue, like what type of institution they want to attend, whether they want to start at a 4-year university, a public university, a 2-year college, etc. And like diversity of institution as well. So really thinking about like the college self that like the students are about to enter, right? And then I argue that this is kind of like what's most focused on in like literature and in like conversations about college choice. It's really focusing on like, oh, this institution can offer them such majors, so it makes sense that they would apply to this. But kind of my paper and my data kind of contradicts that like a little bit in terms of students, yes, are thinking about academics, but they're also thinking about these other like interrelated conceptions of the future. So I also talk about the career possible self, which is a bit more distant, and this is really decisions based on career and employment post-college. And then I go into the familial possible self, which I kind of say that it transcends the time like constructs, because students here are really thinking about like what role they want to take in their families and intergenerationally. And as we'll see in some of the excerpts from the students, they're not just thinking about like themselves right now, they're thinking about how they're going to maintain their parents in the future, how they're going to support younger siblings once they want to go to college, how they want their future children to be raised, etc. So like the students are really thinking about these things in conversation with each other as they make decisions to pursue higher education. And one can argue that like these kinds of possible selves are not unique to the children of Latinx immigrants because all students have to choose a major. Most students will probably think about what kind of job they want to have after college. And some students will be also very motivated by family. But I kind of argue that for these particular students, we really need to pay attention to these immigrant histories and legacies that are informing their futures, even though they're taking place in the past and the present. And we really need to think about how these stories continue on into their future aspirations. And then especially for this sample, I found that socioeconomic status, so having grown up low income and being the first in their families to pursue college, as well as gender, are playing big roles in how students are like thinking about their futures and really shape who they think they can become even and who they need to become in some cases. And I kind of, theoretical work is fun and whatnot, and that's what I spend a lot of my time doing at Stanford. But at the same time, I think that students' words speak much stronger than any kind of conceptual theory can. So I really want to show what like the college possible self and these other possible selves look like in the words of these students. So here I have an excerpt from Peter, who really wanted to go to the University of Michigan and Michigan universities in general. And the counselor, when I talked to her, she was a little confused. She's like, this kid has no like experience going to Michigan. He won't even know how to like deal with the snow, etc. He ultimately ends up going to Cal State Chico. But the reason why he wanted to go to the University of Michigan or another type of institution in Michigan is because he really wanted the major that they had, but he also talks a bit about wanting to go to college for his family first and foremost. So I'll read out his quote. Mechatronics is for me like I am the one who is deciding to be an engineer. And I want to be in Michigan. I really want to explore the nature and have actual winters. I really like the environment and the weather's what I want. But maybe an issue of mine is that I have never thought of my future for myself. I thought of my future for my family, like, oh, you have helped me out so much, so I want to go to college. I want to do this. Like the only times I have thought for myself is like what I want to do, which is mechatronics. But the reason behind is more so to help out my family. Because I'm the youngest, my siblings dropped out of community college already. So I'm the last hope. So that's my personal sense of why I want to go to college, because it gives me what I want to study and then also my objective of helping out my family. So we see here like Peter like is making decisions for himself all the time. Like he's thinking about like what he wants to major in, how that's going to lead him to a future career. And like he wants to experience winter. So that's why he wants to go to Michigan. But we kind of see how like the main motivation for wanting to pursue college in the first place is rooted in the family and kind of seeing his role in the family as like the last hope. And I think it's a very deep example of like how students are contemplating these different decisions as they're making very like practical decisions in their college applications. And then we can kind of understand then why Peter, when he got accepted to the University of Michigan and Michigan State University, he actually opted for Cal State Chico instead. And the main reason was because at the end of it, he couldn't imagine himself being that far away from family. And even though he had like kind of his dream outcome, at the end of it, we see that like family had to come first for him. And even though Cal State Chico is about like an 8-hour drive away from where his family lives in Southeast Los Angeles, that of course seems much more manageable than being miles and miles away in another state. So we kind of see how these different possible selves creep into students' decision-making. And then the career possible self, I met Alyssa through she was bickering with the college counselor, and then I recruited her afterwards. But she was bickering because the counselor was like, you have really good grades, like you could definitely get into a University of California, which is kind of like considered a tier above the Cal State system. But she kind of argued like, I want to go to Cal State LA, like that's my dream school because it has a direct pathway to be able to become a teacher. To which the counselor said, like, how do you even know you want to become a teacher? You're 17. So it's kind of discounting this like very strong holding she had for becoming a teacher. But when I talked to her more, she revealed that it's not just about becoming a teacher, but kind of getting a job that has stuff that her parents' current jobs don't have. So I'll read her quote. I've been raised with the idea of going to college because my parents would always tell me that going to college, well, maybe it's not my only option, but it's better for me instead of working in a factory like they have been. For example, my dad, he's always like, you don't want to work in this like me. You don't want to. You want to be the boss of your own self instead of having a boss behind my back all the time. I feel like that's why I've been raised with the idea that college is basically the correct path for my future. So kind of when I dug deeper, it wasn't so much that like she wants to be a teacher, although that's like a big part also of like why she wants to pursue college, because she really wants to give back to students and just be there for her community as a teacher. But at the same time, there's also these principles of like wanting to be her own boss, like wanting to be in a middle class profession that really have a strong adherence for her. And especially because kind of the fear itself was kind of continuing in laborious jobs that her parents have been in. So not only is she kind of like, I don't want this to be my future, but her parents have a big role in saying, you don't want to do this. Like, we do this for you, but we don't want you to continue having to do this. So we kind of see her college aspirations as being very rooted in trying to break like this cycle of working in these types of jobs. And then the familiar possible self, I'll end with Jackie and her excerpt. And she really was one of the students who was really focused on family. And like you can tell from her quote, when I asked her what the purpose of going to college is, she says, my purpose is to make my mom happy. Like, of course, I want to be happy, but I also want to make her happy and proud because of how hard she has worked for me. And for my sisters too, being a single parent and having to pay these high taxes in California, oh my God, it must be really hard for her. So for me, I want to be like my mom. I really look up to her. And if I ever have children, I want to be the mother that my mom was to me. My mom is happy with wherever I go. That's why I chose Cal State Sacramento, because I had the distance from home I wanted and a criminal justice major. And my mom, she's just proud that I'll be the first in the family to go to college and be like a role model to my sisters. So here, Jackie's really doing a lot of like this intergenerational thinking. She's really like, sure, I want to be happy, but I really want my mom to be happy. And she acknowledges that like her mom has had to go through a lot to be able to raise her and her sisters. So for a lot of her reason for going to college is kind of rooted in wanting to make her parents proud, right? But she also talks about like thinking about her future children and like thinking about like how college might set them up for a different future. But she also wants to have those values that her mom really ingrained in her, and also thinking about the current generation and being a role model to her sisters. So we see like this, a lot of this like intergenerational thinking, not just thinking in terms of like the present and like the nearest future, which is college, but really thinking about like what college is going to help them accomplish. And that's something that not only these three students speak to, but really all the participants show this like very optimistic, futuristic self, with the acknowledgement that it's going to be hard to get there because there's certain opportunities that they haven't had. And while they hope to have it in higher education, they also are not unaware of the fact that it is kind of an uphill climb. And for a lot of them at the application process, like it is already. So this kind of leads me to my discussion and hopefully some of the takeaways that I hope this presentation can give us and can set us up for the small group discussions. First, I just hope to show that possible selves reveal the importance of values and beliefs that affect tangible college decisions. So if we go back to Alice, it wasn't just the money that was important. Sure, maybe more financial aid would have helped and would have helped her maybe pursue Cal State LA. But at the same time, it's not just that. It's also acknowledging that the emotional and financial well-being of her family is at stake when thinking about college decisions. So we see how these values and beliefs that are rooted majority in family, but there's also other values that are rooted in there as well, affect how students are contemplating these multiple decision factors. Secondly, I hope to show that educational futures do not only rest on familial educational histories, but other legacies that also contribute to a strong educational adherence and aspiration building, and kind of redefining what it means to be ready for college. In a lot of the work that I do, we talk about education intergenerationally, but only in the sense of educational history. So we use terms like first generation a college student to describe a student who's the first in their families to attend college. We refer to legacy students when we're referring to students who have parents who went to the college that they are now going to attend. So we use and invoke a lot of this language about familial histories, but if we only look at familial histories, we're really discounting the knowledge that can come from other sources, such as immigration, and especially for students who are the first in their families to go to college. These histories can be very impactful, and it doesn't mean that they're at a deficit because they didn't go to college, but rather institutions have to be able to recognize their immigrant histories and the histories they do have as a strength if they're going to survive and thrive at college institutions. So we as practitioners and as people who work with these students need to find ways to elevate these strengths rather than casting them as an deficit because they don't have that precedent of like parental education. Even though it's important and formative, there's other histories that we can build upon as well. And lastly, I hope to really think about like to help children of Latinx immigrants realize their possible selves, their differing but intersecting priorities need to be treated and respected as strengths. So by this, I mean that like we had a lot of cases where educators were telling students like, oh, you need to be realistic. You need to like think short term, like don't think that far ahead. But these students like are going to be inclined to do it because their immigrant legacies are really encouraging them to think about the past, present, and future all together. So we really need to think about ways that we can respect that in the educational setting, especially in a setting where like it's really individualistic and some of these like differing priorities are not elevated in the ways that they couldn't be. So yeah, just kind of final takeaways. I hope to just kind of link like mindset considerations in college decision-making literature, portray how familial histories outside of solely educational ones affect educational futures. And lastly, to the point that I started this presentation with, of thinking as college as more than just an academic institution. A lot of conversations that I'm in with right now is kind of thinking about like how COVID-19 kind of led to increased unengagement from students. Students are like struggling a lot more to like show up to class. And those are a lot of the conversations that I hear. But I think taking an approach of like, well, the students coming to our institutions to learn, that's one of the main reasons, but also they have a lot of differing priorities and expectations for their higher education that maybe don't align with what we want them to align with in this more individualistic higher education system. That's the case here at Stanford, especially where like students who take leaves of absences to like do some entrepreneurial pursuit or like to take an internship are like honored and like kind of awarded for that behavior. But when a student takes a leave of absence when they are trying to support their family by working full time, that's seen as like chastised or that's just like not respected in a lot of contexts. So we really need to think about like these differing like levels of expectations that universities have and really thinking about like why students are pursuing college in the first place, because that might contextualize a lot of the decisions that they decide to make on a day-to-day basis on our campuses. And yeah, I hope to just like lead us with the question, how can educators and colleges further recognize multiple facets, not only in the college decision-making process, but in general? And yeah, that's like the citation formally. This chapter is going to be a part of a edited volume called Supporting College Students of Immigrant Origin, New Insights from Research, Policy, and Practice. Hopefully coming out in 2024, but if you know the publishing process, who knows, we'll see. So yeah, that's about it. And this is my contact information. I'd really enjoy just getting to know y'all more, being in conversation with you all, and just special acknowledgements to my advisors. And of course, the 14 students that I spoke with who trusted me with their stories to share with you today and give me hope for our collective futures. So yeah, thank you so much. And I'm happy to take any questions before we jump into the small group.
Wow, thank you so much, Leslie Luqueno. I had my whole life flash before my eyes, and I wish I was one of your interviewees at the time, 30 plus years ago when I was going through that process. We are so thrilled that you're still here. I know this is a long haul, but I'm hoping that this is information that can help us advance student success. So thank you for shining a light on such an invisible population, and your intersectional analysis to me was inspirational because you were very attentive, right? Race, gender, and first gen status, immigrant status, all of those things, ethnicity at the same time that you were looking into these experiences.